Well, today we've got good news and bad news. The good news is if you pay attention at all, if you have any experience at all with the Lord and Lord's people, you already know the bad news. The bad news is, as you can tell from the title of the lesson, there are wolves in sheep's clothing among the people of God. And you may be acquainted with this expression from other contexts. You may not be aware that this is actually a Bible phrase that's been co-opted by our society in the last 200 or 300 years or so. It's one of many phrases actually that are done that way. But the idea of wolves in sheep's clothing is perfectly appropriate, or maybe anyway, completely appropriate if you're talking about politicians, you're talking about administrators at your school district, or the person in charge of your HR department at work, or whoever it happens to be. It very well may be that there is someone who is posing as part of the solution and they're actually part of the problem. And that is the idea of the wolves in sheep's clothing here. But when Jesus gives us the analogy, it's important for us to point out here, he's not talking about carnal relationships. He's not talking about everyday acquaintances, people who appear to be one thing and yet are not, and just that. In the context of Matthew chapter 7, I'm going to read a section here in just a second, we see that this is talking specifically about the people of God, about interlopers among the people of God. And really this entire context, going back to verse number 13 in Matthew chapter 7, and going through the end of the chapter, we won't read quite that far, but this is all about posers. This is all about people who claim a relationship with Jesus and are not qualified to do so, who are not accepted by Jesus, in fact. Look at verse number 13. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles are they. So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. And we'll stop the reading there. Again, you could go back, and I would encourage you to go back and look at the broader context here in Matthew 7 and in the Sermon on the Mount as far as that goes. Or even broader than that, the New Testament. And even broader than that, the Bible at large. There's always been this phenomenon. There has always been those who are among God's people claiming to be not only the people of God, but leaders among the people of God. And they are no such thing. At least they're certainly not recognized as such by God. And we do well not to recognize them either. We are admonished over and over again to test the spirits, 1 John 4, verse 1, to examine people to see if they are, in fact, teaching the truth. The Bereans are encouraged and lifted up as an example to us in Acts 17, verse 11, as people who tried Barnabas and Paul. They searched the scriptures daily to see if those things that they were saying were true. That's a good thing, whether you're talking about me or some preacher that you see on the internet, someplace else, or your local evangelist, whoever it happens to be, your parents even, as far as that goes. No human being is above suspicion, as it were. We need to be examining everyone and examining by the Word of God, because we know that the Word of God is accurate. We know that the Word of God is from God, and any fair representation of the thoughts of God, the motives of God, the desires of God are going to be in harmony with God's will. In fact, they're going to be rooted in God's will, as revealed in the New Testament. There are going to be people who come along, there are people among us today who are going to say exactly the opposite. They may or may not take personal credit for it. They may give credit to some guru somewhere or to modern science or whatever it happens to be. But ultimately, regardless of how person-centered this is, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go, ultimately, this is about taking credit away from God, taking credit and authority away from the Holy Spirit, and giving it to some person or some group of people. And we need to make sure that we are above that. These two analogies that he gives us right here in the middle of the section we read, the idea of the wolves in sheep's clothing, as well as the trees that bear good fruit or bad fruit. This all necessarily implies that we are up to this, going back even further in the context of verse 7, I think it is, where we're told, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be opened to you. The implication is there, and beyond implication, the promise is given to us there, that you are capable of doing this. It may take effort, it may take help, but you can read your Bible and know what God's will is for you. And you can furthermore know the people who are part of the solution and people who are part of the problem. So this isn't necessarily going to be a pepper-upper kind of sermon. It's more of a warning kind of sermon. And hopefully, of course, you've been sufficiently warned in times past. But I urge you to follow along in the text. Take some notes if you like. We're going to refer to several passages in the New Testament that touch on this. And not the most organized of sermons that I've ever preached necessarily, but to stir up our cautionary thoughts, to remind ourselves that anyone who claims to be a preacher of God's word, including this person, needs to be examined, needs to be tested by the scriptures, and by the scripture is the only way that we can effectively test one another or test others. So let's talk about what false prophets look like here for a few minutes today. I'll refer you over to 2 Peter chapter 1, first of all. This is one of the primary points of this epistle. Peter warning his contemporaries, or as he's about to die apparently, warning them that there are, just as there always have been, people among the people of God who are tearing up the fellowship, who are doing damage to the cause of Christ. Verse number 1 and following. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be also false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. Many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of the truth will be maligned, and in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. You can flip over and look at the Epistle of Jude, the one chapter Epistle of Jude, and see that the prophecy that Peter gave in this text has already been fulfilled in the eyes of Jude's readers. They've already seen this happen, and the letters couldn't have been that far apart when they were written. That's not necessarily surprising, though, as Peter indicates here. This has always been the case. It's been the exception rather than the rule, when the people of God were not infiltrated by those who were of other persuasions, those who did not truly love the Lord. And the Greek word here for false, pseudo, you see that in all kinds of words in the English language. A pseudonym is a fake name. Pseudo this or pseudo that is a very common prefix to refer to something that is fake, something that is false. It's not the same thing as something that is incorrect. If you have false eyelashes, it's not that you have the wrong eyelashes, it's that you have eyelashes that are pretending to be real. The same thing goes for anything else, basically, that you call false. It is inherently deceitful. I'm not saying it's inherently sinful. If you wear false eyelashes, more power to you. That's not the point at all. But when we present ourselves in a false way, it's more than simply being incorrect on some Bible matter or some doctrinal matter, some moral matter. There is deception that is involved in these false prophets here. And we'll talk about their motives as we go along here. But these are people who claim to be servants of Jesus, and they are not. They may even be self-deceived. They may have convinced themselves that this lie that they're telling is the truth. But it's a lie. It's a lie from beginning to end. And it basically all boils down to authority. And I know I use that word a lot. I'll continue to use that word a lot. Flip over to 3 John, just a few pages over. 3 John, verse number 9 and 10. We know about Diotrephes, probably. Verse number 9 reads, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words, and not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either, and he forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. The effrontery, the presumption that would be involved in something like this just kind of staggers the imagination. I'm sure you're like me. We would love the opportunity to have an apostle among us and have him talk about what it meant to walk with Jesus and the lessons that he learned, and hear from someone who is directly inspired by the Holy Spirit what the will of God is for our lives. The idea of having someone like that write us a letter and someone stand up in the church and say, We're not going to read that. We're not going to do that. I know better than he does, and essentially, literally or figuratively, tearing the letter in half. No, we are not going to do this, and if you want to do this, you have no part in this fellowship. That's who Diotrephes is here, a person who is refusing to submit to authority. And Diotrephes, granted, is something of an extreme case. I'm not sure I've ever known of anybody who did something quite that bold, for lack of a more negative term. But nevertheless, that same kind of attitude is seen in all kinds of other quarters. Maybe it's a little bit more disguised, maybe it's a little bit more subtle. But ultimately, it always comes down to the same basic principle. Are you willing to submit to the words of Jesus Christ as communicated through his apostles and other inspired writers that we have preserved for us in the New Testament? That's a yes or no question. We can have disagreements, we can have arguments, we can have debates among the people of God as to exactly how we go about doing that. And we can spend time profitably doing that. But when we have a situation in the Lord's church where someone says, I don't care what the Bible says, we're going to do this other thing, whether they said it in so many words or not, that is heresy, that is rebellion, and as we're going to see, that kind of behavior has always been condemned by the true prophets of God, by the Lord Jesus Christ himself. We have no business taking that kind of authority, that kind of presumption upon ourselves. Now, why would somebody do something like that? Well, I offer a couple of things here for your consideration. In some situations, it's nothing more complicated than sheer carnal greed. And I don't want to get too much into the heads of people. I don't want to read motives any more than is basically necessary, judging, again, by the fruits that they bear, back to Matthew chapter 7. But we see by inspiration that at least in some situations, and maybe you've seen some of them, it's nothing more than money or some other carnal goal, trying to be the best, trying to be the biggest, trying to be the most popular, the richest, whatever. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul addresses the same concept that we saw John addressing before, and he writes, if anyone advocates a different doctrine that is different than what Paul's been writing about, different from the sound doctrine that he advocates here, if anyone advocates a different doctrine and does not agree with sound words, those of our Lord Jesus Christ, important point there, these are not Paul's words, these are not Peter's words, these are Jesus' words that he gave to his apostles, that we have recorded in the New Testament here. Those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with the doctrine conforming to godliness, he is conceited and understands nothing, but he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arise envy, strife, abusive language, evil suspicions, and constant friction between men of depraved minds and deprived of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain. Now, in the immediate context here, verse number 5, gain seems like it is a personal gain, an ego exercise, essentially. If I can make the gospel about some arcane point, some obscure point that nobody else is intelligent enough or motivated enough to investigate, I'm the only source of wisdom. I'm the only source of intelligent, rational commentary on these kind of things. That makes me important. That makes me virtually necessary among the people of God. You know, anytime you have a fellowship where one person or one family is considered to be indispensable, the church will fall apart without Brother X or Family Y or whatever. Check yourself in situations like that. All of us are expendable. The Lord's work will continue to go on. And oftentimes, not every time obviously, but oftentimes, this kind of reputation among the people of God is deliberately courted by people. And that's what Paul is writing about here. People who obsess over these minutiae, obsess over these fine points that really don't have anything to do with salvation, don't have anything to do with practical Christianity, if you will. That is designed specifically, and again, maybe it's unconscious in some situations, but it's always about the individual, helping the individual look important, helping the individual look necessary. And as he goes on to say, sometimes it's a little bit more obvious than that. Verse number 6, after he says godliness is a means of gain, he says godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment, verse 6. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, again, you might argue from verse number 5, if we quit reading there, that this is not about the money. This is just about the acclaim, the prestige, etc. And we could argue about whether that's any better than it being about the money. But as he goes on to point out, lots of times it comes down to money. Money is the easiest way to measure your importance, your power, your strength, your ability, whatever. It's a very carnal approach. It's an incorrect approach. It has nothing to do with the Spirit, of course. But lots of times we're not living in the Spirit. Lots of times we are fleshly in our evaluation of life, evaluation of ourselves, of others. And these are people who have found a way to turn the gospel of Jesus Christ to their own personal and financial, oftentimes, maybe not every time, but oftentimes, financial benefit. Those people are part of the problem, he says here. Those people are, what does he call them? Conceited, understands nothing. Verse 4 has a morbid interest in, etc. These are people who are hurting churches. They may be the smartest person in the room. Everybody may believe, they may believe accurately that they're smartest, most educated, most aware of the scriptures of anybody in the Lord's church. But they don't love the Lord, and when it comes down to it, they don't love the brethren. They are loving themselves. They are in it for their own personal gain. I like the way that it's phrased in Philippians chapter 3. In Philippians 3, and I say I like it, it's kind of terrifying, actually. If anything, it's worse than what we read in 1 Timothy chapter 6. In Philippians 3, verse 17, he writes, brethren, and this is in the context, by the way, of back in chapter 1, he was talking about people who are preaching the gospel for their own personal purposes. And one of those purposes is to defeat the Apostle Paul. And Paul says, if they're teaching the truth, let him go. I can take it. But ultimately, you don't want that kind of person in your fellowship. You don't want that kind of person leading you in an understanding of God's word. They're not godly themselves. How can they possibly create others in the image of Jesus when they are not trying to be in the image of Jesus themselves? And if that sounds harsh, trust me, Paul puts it in language that's far harsher than that. Starting in verse number 17 here, brethren, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. Those are the good people, people like Paul and Epaphroditus, he mentions earlier, Timothy also, and many others. The contrast, though, verse 18, for many walk, of whom I often told you, and now tell you, even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. And that last phrase there, the idea of setting your mind on earthly things, that's what it's all about. Earthly things are not necessarily bad things, but when they take the place of spiritual things, they take the place of heavenly things, they become bad things. When your motivation to serve as you are serving in the Lord's church, whether it's as an elder, a deacon, a preacher, whatever, when your motivation becomes earthly in its nature, making friends, making money, getting power, having people call you rabbi or whatever it happens to be, when that is your objective, you become one of these people that he's talking about here. The language, though, their end is destruction. We'll talk about that in a little bit also. Bad things are going to happen to these kind of people. They can call themselves God's people or Christians all they want to. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, the text says. Remember back in Matthew 7, verse 21. He says, in the first place, their end is destruction, and he says their God is their appetite, or literally their belly, their stomach. They are serving their own purposes. What feeds me is a good thing. If it doesn't feed me, it's either a neutral thing or a bad thing. All they're interested in ultimately is themselves. That's the only thing that concerns them. If serving others' interests will serve their own interests, then they'll go ahead and serve. That's fine. But it's not about the other people. It's always about themselves. And you know people like this, I'm sure. I've seen people like this. I've seen people like this in the church, unfortunately. These people are not part of the solution. They're part of the problem. And again, it's because they set their mind on earthly things. Verse number 19. We are citizens of heaven, as he goes on to say in verse number 20. That's where our citizenship is. We are thinking about heavenly things. If you're motivated primarily or even exclusively by earthly considerations, you need to rethink your standing with Jesus Christ. That's not where he is calling you to be. And if your leaders are doing that, you need to reevaluate that as well. Because people who are not going to heaven themselves are not going to lead you to heaven. You may get there on accident, but you're not going to get there because of what they do. They are their own gods. They are severed from Christ. He is no longer their Savior. The text says in another context, in Galatians 5, verse 4, they've been severed from Christ, they've fallen from grace because they have rejected the one true gospel and found a gospel that glorifies themselves in some fashion. And ultimately, it's because they want to glorify themselves. This is not an accident. This is rebellion against the authority of Jesus Christ. Now, I'll refer you back to 2 Peter again before we close up. In 2 Peter chapter 2, we left off in verse number 4, I think it was. And I want to read a little bit longer reading here because there's no real convenient stopping point. Just in case you think this might not be that big of a deal. If you think that, well, a wolf in a sheep's clothing, he's kind of sheep-like. Surely if he was that big of a deal, there'd be more of a furor around him. If he'd have blood on his chops already or something like that. Maybe we should wait around until it becomes a real problem, a pressing problem, a serious problem, an undeniable problem, and then take care of this. It's very easy to minimize the importance of steering clear of the appearance of this, of any association with these false teachers. Again, you're capable of doing this. The question is willingness. Are you motivated to do this? Is the local fellowship motivated to keep these people on the outside? They are going to be here. And eventually they're probably going to be among us. What are we going to do in that moment? Maybe this will help us make up our mind. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for what he saw and heard, for by what he saw and heard that righteous man while living among them felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. There's 3 examples for us there of God distinguishing between righteous people and wicked people, destroying the wicked and saving the righteous. He says, then the Lord knows, verse number 9, how to rescue the godly from temptation, and how to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge the flesh by its corrupt desires and despise authority. And that's where the sentence ends in the New American Standard Bible, and that's in the middle of the verse, I realize. But that's the break of the thought there. And he goes on to describe more specifically what this terror looks like, what this destruction, looks like, and why they're worthy of this destruction. But that'll do for our purposes here. These people are condemned by the Lord, not by me, not even by Peter, but by the Lord. God is capable of finding good people in these places. Finding the souls that are walking in white in church in Sardis, for instance, in Revelation chapter 3, in a church that's dead. God knows how, he tells Timothy, the Lord knows those who are his. And that's the idea here. He's able to find righteous Lot. He's able to find righteous Noah. He's able to find you and me if we're walking righteously in a wicked world or even in a wicked church. These ones are going to be saved. So don't fear that the wolves among us are somehow going to drag you, kicking and screaming, into the devil's hell. That's not the point at all. You can be saved. You will be saved, in fact, if you are determined to be saved. But these ones who are working against God's interests, these ones who are part of the problem instead of part of the solution, God has always found these ones. God has always acted in the harshest of terms with regard to them. Let's not assume that it's our sole responsibility. If we don't find the false teachers, if we don't find the false prophets, then they're just going to run rampant forever and the bad guys are going to win. They may run rampant in our lifetime. They may destroy churches. But 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17 tells us the one who destroys the temple of God, God himself will destroy. Let's not think for a second that people are going to get away with this kind of thing, because they won't. There is always going to be the hand of God hidden from our sight, not always acting in our time and in our way, but nevertheless acting, coming in judgment against these ones who have taken the wrong side. So whether this is going to work out for them or not, or whether it's going to work out for us, is not our concern. God has that. God will take care of that. Don't worry about God's end of this bargain. What we need to do is, first of all, of course, know the sound doctrine, know what God's will is for our lives, and do the best we can to carry it out in our lives. And if you do that, if you just do that, you're going to be fine. God will find you. God will save you. His grace is powerful enough to bring salvation to anyone who truly wants to be saved. And secondly, these ones who have this otherwise attitude, who may be trying to drag you along into the pits of hell with them, God will find them too. And if we don't see justice, if we don't see righteousness carried out in our lifetime, in local churches, etc., don't worry about that. Maybe we'll be these martyred souls beneath the throne in Revelation who cry out for justice, who cry out for vengeance against those who are wicked. And Jesus says, wait a little bit. I know what we're doing. I know what the future holds. We can have confidence that such ones are going to get their comeuppance in due course of time. So make sure you're not one of them, first of all, and then make sure you don't fall into their line of thinking as they are trying to draw souls away from Jesus. And as much as you can, wage war against these ones. Limit their influence. Provide a different influence, a godly influence, so that souls will be drawn into Jesus' righteousness rather than into man's unrighteousness. We can do that, and we must do that if we are going to be God's people, if we're going to be salt in the earth. Sometimes we need to be salt in the church. Sometimes we need to be positive influences for our brethren, because the influences for the devil are just so strong. God will give us the strength to succeed in this. If we will allow him to succeed, if we will commit ourselves to victory, the victory will be ours. And more to the point, the victory, of course, will be his. So don't fear the wolves in sheep's clothing. Be aware of them, but stand up to them. If we can face down this roaring lion that Peter writes about in 1 Peter chapter 5, if we can stare down the devil himself, then surely we can stand down these ones who are working in his interests, who are trying to defeat the cause of Jesus Christ. Jesus will give us the power. We just have to find it. We have to utilize it. I hope and pray that this has been a blessing to you. I hope that this is going to encourage you to live a life of godliness and righteousness, despite whatever kind of influences you may run across in this life. May God give you the strength. May God give us all the strength. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless.